Medjugorje has not earned your belief. 100 Reasons Why. 100 Reasons Catholics May Prudently Doubt the Alleged Apparitions, Even After Rome's Nihil Obstat, by Chris D. Stopp, calling the Gospel of Medjugorje Our Lady, as though the question had been settled. Rome has not settled it. The voice that has spoken there since 1981 announced its own end twice in its first 2 weeks, then continued for 4 decades. It promised a priest a light sentence the day before he received 3.5 years in prison. It vouched for witnesses whom sealed envelopes, tape recordings, and sworn testimony impeach. It threatened the bishop appointed to judge it, and Rome, in the very act of permitting devotion, corrected its theology and warned that some of its words come from human desire rather than heaven. That is the record. Catholics are being asked to attach the Mother of God's name to it. In September 2024, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith granted a nihil obstat to the spiritual experience connected with Medjugorje. That decision permits public devotion and recognizes abundant good fruits, including conversions, confessions, vocations, prayer, reconciliation, and renewed sacramental life. Catholics may make pilgrimages there, and they may receive the pastoral care the Church provides there. But Rome did not declare that the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared at Medjugorje. It did not certify the messages as words from heaven. It expressly left the supernatural character of the alleged apparitions undecided, called the messages alleged, acknowledged confusion, theological inaccuracy, and human interests in the corpus, and stated that the faithful are not obliged to believe in it. Those are not hostile glosses on the decision. They are the fine print of the decision itself. The distinction matters. Catholic prayer is good, confession is good, fasting, conversion, Eucharistic adoration, and devotion to the Mother of God are good. Their goodness does not prove that 6 claimants have spoken with the Blessed Virgin for more than 4 decades. This article does not claim to identify with certainty what caused every reported experience. It does not require a theory of fraud, hallucination, social pressure, or demonic activity that explains every event. It argues something more limited and much easier to establish. The alleged apparitions have not earned Catholic belief. A word about the count. The numbered 100 below are the documentary core, ranked by evidentiary force. Some of the most explosive and memorable accusations made against Medjugorje appear later in a bonus section because they depend more heavily on reported detail, surrounding context, or a traditional judgment about what is fitting in a Marian apparition. They were not excluded because they are harmless. They were reserved so that disputed claims would not be smuggled into the strongest case, as though every charge carried the same weight. Read the fine print of your own approval. The 2024 decision is often summarized in one triumphant word: approved. Read the document, and the triumph becomes a quarantine. Rome permits devotion, but withholds supernatural authentication. It directs pilgrims toward Christ, the sacraments, prayer, and the pastoral fruits of the place, not toward meetings with the alleged seers. It requires its cautionary note to introduce collections of the messages, and it requires prior authorization before future or previously unpublished messages may circulate. The Church permits Catholics to receive what is good while fencing off the very claims that made Medjugorje famous. The DDF also does something no supposed approval should need to do if the message stream were a trustworthy transcript of heaven. It repairs theological statements, warns that some messages may reflect confused human perceptions, and identifies at least one command as explicable solely by the visionary's personal desires. Rome itself does not trust these messages enough to let them circulate without warning and supervision. Why should a Catholic trust them enough to build his interior life upon them? This is not a negative declaration that nothing supernatural ever occurred. But notice what kind of document it is. Rome does not fence, censor, supervise, and pre-screen a witness it believes. Medjugorje received permission for pastoral devotion, not a verdict that Mary appeared. What if the danger looks Catholic? A Catholic does not build his faith upward from an apparition. He judges every apparition downward from the faith already delivered. Christ's public revelation comes to the Church in sacred scripture and apostolic tradition. The magisterium guards and authoritatively proposes it. Catechisms transmit and explain it. Only after all of that do private revelations enter the picture. Even Fatima, declared worthy of belief and embraced throughout the Church, is not another source of doctrine. Following Benedict XIV's classical distinction, an approved private revelation receives prudent human belief, not the assent of divine and Catholic faith. It may recall Catholics to the gospel, but it cannot add to the gospel, correct tradition, or govern the Church. The Vatican's theological commentary on Fatima explains this traditional order. Medjugorje has not received even Fatima's traditional positive judgment. Rome permits the associated devotion while declining to authenticate the apparitions. Yet the Medjugorje voice has repeatedly been treated as though it could teach doctrine, direct priests, overrule bishops, and judge the Pope. That turns the Catholic order of belief upside down. A counterfeit aimed at Catholics would not open with blasphemy. Blasphemy would fail in an hour. It would open with rosaries, fasting, peace, conversion, and the name of Mary, because those are the only credentials Catholics accept. The goods would be real. The question is what the goods would be recruited to authenticate, and where the attention and obedience would slowly move. St. Paul did not treat even an angelic appearance as self-authenticating. An angel from heaven preaching another gospel is to be rejected, and Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Galatians 1:8, 2 Corinthians 11:14. Weigh that second warning. Scripture does not say the devil disguises himself as a devil. His most effective costume is light. The Catholic question is therefore not, does this phenomenon recommend good things? It is, does the whole phenomenon tell the truth, submit to the church, and remain subordinate to public revelation? A parallel religion does not require another church building or a formally separate creed. It requires a rival source of revelation, privileged interpreters, a competing chain of obedience, its own commands and calendar, promises and threats, and a way of making criticism feel like sin. Read that list again slowly. Medjugorje has a functional counterpart for every item on it. This is the limited sense in which cult-like tactics matter. It is not a diagnosis of every pilgrim, priest, or claimant, and it does not prove conscious conspiracy or satanic origin. It means that devotional language cannot be allowed to end the investigation, because Catholic things can be used to give an unverified authority the appearance of Catholic legitimacy. The order of judgment must hold. The gospel judges the gospel, never the reverse. Doubt may be the more Marian position. Private revelation makes an affirmative claim. Someone says that heaven spoke, and Catholics are asked to attach the Mother of God's name to the words. The burden therefore belongs to the claim, not to the Catholic who asks for credible evidence. No one insults Our Lady by refusing to attribute contradictions, false predictions, factual errors, threats against a bishop, or manipulated documents to her. The insult would be to excuse such things because her name has already been attached to them. Reverence for Our Lady should make Catholics harder to convince, not easier. She is not a brand name that makes a doubtful story holy. She is the Immaculate Mother of God, and no earthly mother's name would be signed to 4 decades of contradictions with so little care. That is why this article uses the Gospa, the figure, and the alleged apparition. The figure may be called Our Lady only after the attribution has been established. Attribution is the question before us, the price of belief. Not every item below has equal force. Some are direct falsifications, some impeach testimony or documents, some expose doctrinal error, ecclesiastical disorder, investigative weakness, or the ordinary mechanisms behind an allegedly miraculous effect. The cumulative question is what the whole record looks like when all of it is allowed into the room. A jury does not need to discover exactly why a witness made every false statement before deciding that the witness has not earned confidence. Neither does a Catholic need to solve Medjugorje before withholding belief from it. The first reason is the key to the rest. The alleged apparition reportedly vouched that everything the 6 claimants said corresponded to truth. That is an extraordinary warranty, and it cuts one way only. Every proved lie, retracted story, concealed document, and contradictory account becomes evidence against the phenomenon by the phenomenon's own standard. The voice guaranteed the witnesses, and the witnesses failed. I am not asking you to call Medjugorje false. I am asking whether you are willing to sign your name under everything belief requires. 100 reasons to withhold belief. The reasons are ranked from the most damaging to the least. The last items are cumulative rather than conclusive by themselves, but none has been included merely for atmosphere. Together they test the alleged messages, witnesses, predictions, documents, relations with authority, healing claims, and scientific arguments. The story indicts itself. These first reasons require no theology. They require a calendar, a tape recorder, and a sealed envelope. 1. The apparition guaranteed the truthfulness of witnesses who demonstrably lied. Asked about the 6 claimants and the promised sign, the figure reportedly vouched that everything they said corresponded to truth. The sealed paper lie, Mirjana's false sworn founding story, denials contradicted by Vika's diary, and Maria's retracted endorsement make that warranty self-refuting. The phenomenon staked its credibility on witnesses whom the documents impeach. Bishop Janich records the warranty and the contradictions. 2. Ivan lied about the sealed paper being blank. Ivan later claimed that he had fooled the commission by submitting an empty sheet. When the sealed envelope was opened before witnesses, it contained his dated and signed description of the promised permanent sign. This is a proved lie about the central promised proof of the apparitions. Janich. 3. Ivan's sealed prediction gave a failed date and object. His signed paper described a great shrine that was supposed to appear as the permanent sign in June. No such shrine appeared. This was not an elastic recollection, but a written, signed, preserved, and falsified prediction. Jonich. 4. Maria admitted that a heavenly endorsement had been manufactured through her. She first signed a statement presenting Father Tomislav Vlasich's new community as part of the Gospel's plan. She later declared before the Blessed Sacrament that she had never asked for such confirmation, that the statement was untrue, and that Vlasich had pushed her toward what the public expected. Janich. 5. The apparitions were supposed to end after 3 more days. On June 30th, 1981, the seers reported that the figure would appear for only 3 additional days. The phenomenon continued for decades. A clear temporal prediction failed during the first week. Bishop Parrich's study of the original recordings. 6. The claimants announced another final apparition on July 3rd. Contemporary testimony records that the children emerged that day saying the appearances had ended. The later continuation, therefore, cannot be dismissed as a promoter's misunderstanding of the earlier 3-day promise. Manfred Hauke's first week analysis. 7. Father Jozo was falsely promised that he would not receive a serious sentence. On October 21st, 1981, the figure reportedly said that he would not be punished severely. The following day, he received a prison sentence of 3½ years. Parrott's documentary study. 8. The figure misstated the status of Father Jozo's trial. The same alleged message said that his trial remained unfinished and ongoing. The proceedings had already ended. A heavenly speaker should not make a checkable factual mistake about an event central to its own message. Parrich. 9. A pilgrim's false rumor entered the alleged revelation channel. Vika and Yakov reported that the figure showed them Ivan and explained that he would receive no apparitions until November 15th because of school. The parish chronicle later admitted that Vika had heard this from a pilgrim, and that checking with Ivan showed it was false. Ordinary hearsay had been placed in the apparition's mouth. The diocesan documentary study. A voice the Mother of God should not be made to own. Here the phenomenon begins doing more than encouraging devotion. It starts functioning as a teaching authority, delivering doctrine, disciplines, historical claims, and corrections that Catholics are expected to receive because of the speaker's alleged identity. Remember what that identity claim costs. Every error below is an error you are being asked to attribute to the seat of wisdom. 10. The early messages treat all faiths as equal before God. The wording does not merely affirm the equal natural dignity of persons. It presents members of all faiths as equal before God, and depicts God as governing the faiths as a sovereign governs kingdoms. The DDF later supplied a more orthodox distinction between persons and religions, but that is a repair, not the plain meaning of the original claim. Parrich, DDF. 11. Revealed religion is reduced to a human division. The figure reportedly said that religious divisions are human creations. Christ divinely instituted one church and one supernatural religion. Contradictory religions are not merely human partitions within a common revealed system. Parrich. 12. Differences among churches are reduced to quantities of prayer. Asked whether all churches are the same, the figure reportedly answered that God is prayed to more in some and less in others. That evades revealed doctrine, sacramental communion, jurisdiction, and union with the church founded by Christ. Parrich. 13. Christ is called one and triune. The Son is one divine person, not 3. It is the one God who is triune in Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. The DDF itself calls the expression theologically incorrect, and supplies an orthodox meaning that the alleged words do not state. DDF. 14. God is said to be unable to pardon certain grave sins. A July 21st, 1982, entry says that the damned committed grave sins that God cannot pardon. No repentant sin exceeds divine mercy. Souls are lost through final impenitence, not through a defect in God's power to forgive. Parrich. 15. All the damned are said to suffer in the same way. Catholic tradition teaches punishment proportioned to guilt. The alleged answer erases the inequality of punishment demanded by divine justice. Parrich. 16. The damned are placed in their bodies before the general resurrection. A reported answer says that people now suffer in hell in soul and body. Ordinary human bodies remain dead until the resurrection, after which bodily punishment follows. Parrich. 17. All the blessed are placed in their bodies before the general resurrection. A May 6, 1982 answer says that the inhabitants of heaven are present in soul and body. Apart from Christ and the assumed Virgin, the saints await the resurrection of the body. Perish. 18. The identity of the resurrected body is apparently denied. A message says that the earthly body decomposes and never comes back to life, after which a transfigured body is received. Catholic doctrine teaches the resurrection and glorification of the same body, not its replacement by another. This claim comes from a promoter compilation and should be judged with that textual limitation in mind. Promoter Message Archive. 19. The claim that these were the world's last apparitions was falsified. The figure reportedly called these the final apparitions in the world. The locally approved San Nicolas apparitions began in 1983, after the reported 1982 statement. The plain universal claim did not survive a later church-recognized case. Promoter Message Archive, Report on San Nicolas. 20. The DDF itself acknowledges contradictory and naturally erroneous material. The 2024 note says that some elements may involve confused human experience, theological inaccuracy, subjective perception, or interests that are not wholly legitimate. A message stream officially requiring that warning has not established a reliable heavenly speaker. DDF 21. Mary is given her own plan of salvation. Several messages speak of Mary's plan of salvation, plans, or projects. The DDF had to explain that Mary possesses no independent salvific program and serves only the divine plan accomplished in Christ. DDF 22. Conversion is said to become too late while a person is still alive. A message says that when the promised sign appears, it will already be too late. The DDF had to recast this as an exhortation not to delay conversion, because a private sign cannot make repentance impossible for a living person. DDF 23. A threat to stop giving messages failed. In February 1985, the figure said that if the parish did not respond, it would give no more messages. The messages continued without any objective fulfillment criterion by which the condition could be tested. The DDF itself notes that they continued unabated. DDF 24. The messages give contradictory fasting rules for the sick. One message exempts the sick from the command that everyone fast. Less than a month later, another says that the sick, just like the healthy, must fast for the sick. The universal directions cannot both govern the same class of people. Promoter, Message Archive. 25. The seers contradict one another about whether the seventh secret was abolished. Mirjana says that prayer and fasting abolished it. Vika later says that it was only mitigated. The same fixed heavenly secret cannot be both abolished and still awaiting fulfillment in reduced form. Diocesan Study of the Secrets and Sign. 26. The seers give incompatible orderings of the warnings and great sign. Mirjana places three secrets or warnings before the visible sign. Vika identifies the third secret itself as that sign. Both sequences cannot describe one fixed series of heavenly secrets. Diocesan Study of the Secrets and Sign. 27. The apparition allegedly gave contradictory instructions about disclosing the sign. 5 claimants said that the figure forbade them to write a confidential description for the commission, even said that it had not forbidden him and submitted one. The same source supposedly issued incompatible instructions concerning the same test. Diocesan Study of the Secrets and Sign. 28. The apparition gave opposite verdicts on Ivan's sealed sign deception. One reported message said that Ivan had erred and that the incident should not have happened. A later report said that he had done nothing wrong and that it was good he wrote what he did. The damage control messages do not deliver one stable moral judgment. Diocesan Study of the Secrets and Sign. 29. Mirjana rewrote why the annual March 18th apparition occurs. Her early account says that the figure promised to appear on every birthday as a special gift. In 2001 and 2011, she insisted that March 18 had nothing to do with her birthday, and instead concerned future secrets. Diocesan Study of Mirjana's changing account. 30. Mirjana's denial of a birthday greeting contradicts her earlier report. She later said that the figure never wished her a happy birthday, yet the Parish Chronicle and a promoter's book quote her 1985 account saying that the figure congratulated her on the occasion. Diocesan Study of Mirjana's changing account. 31. The claimed Marian birthday changed after the figure had accepted September 8th for 3 years. The parish record says that the apparition accepted birthday congratulations on the church's Feast of Mary's Nativity in 1981, 1982, and 1983. It then supplied August 5 as a different exact birthday in 1984. A liturgical feast need not be a historical date, but the internal story still changed. Vlasic Dossier, DDF. 32. The invented birthday was used to forbid 3 days of ordinary work. The 1984 message ordered intensive preparation and no work for 3 days before the alleged 2000th birthday. The DDF identifies this as a clear example explained solely by the visionary's personal desires and tells the faithful not to take it seriously. DDF 33. The figure claimed a message output unprecedented in all history. A 1985 message promised communications unlike anything since the beginning of the world. The boast is self exalting and historically extravagant, especially when attached to a stream the DDF says contains human wishes and confusion. DDF 34. God is said to be unable to accomplish his will without the visionaries. A 1986 message tells the claimants that without them God cannot bring about what he desires. God may freely employ creatures, but he is not metaphysically helpless without these particular people. This wording comes from the promoter corpus, which makes the citation less secure but the proposition no less objectionable, if authentic. Promoter Message Archive. 35. The apparition allegedly recommended Maria Valtorta's pseudo-gospel. Promoter sources preserve statements permitting or recommending the poem of the man-god as a way to know Jesus. The Holy Office placed the work on the index, and the DDF stated in 2025 that its alleged visions and messages cannot be regarded as supernatural. Promoter account of the endorsements, DDF statement on Valtorta. An apparition against the Church. A parallel teaching authority eventually collides with the Church's actual authority. At Medjugorje, the collision did not remain theoretical. As you read this section, keep one question open. Each time the voice intervened, who benefited, heaven or the men handling the seers? 36. The apparition repeatedly became a partisan in the Franciscan rebellion. Instead of confirming ecclesiastical order, the messages intervened in the Herzegovina jurisdictional struggle and consistently supported friars resisting lawful superiors. This is not one stray remark, but a sustained use of heavenly authority in one side's campaign. Janic, diocesan study of the attacks on him. 37. The figure ordered Father Ivica Vego to remain in Mostar against lawful authority. Vica's record says that the apparition declared Vego innocent and told him not to leave. A private voice cannot countermand a canonical transfer or restore a religious to a position from which lawful authority has removed him. Diocesan study of the attacks on Janic. 38. The bishop was declared guilty while the rebellious priests were declared innocent. The figure repeatedly reversed the competent ordinary's judgment in the controversy he was responsible for governing. The alleged revelation made itself an appellate court above the Church before its own authenticity had even been established. Diocesan study of the attacks, Janic. 39. The figure validated priestly ministry despite canonical penalties. The claimants said that Vego and Prusina could celebrate Mass and hear confessions like other priests despite restrictions imposed upon them. An apparition cannot grant faculties or erase lawful prohibitions. Diocesan study of the attacks, Janic. 40. Vica expressly preferred the apparition to the Pope. When Bishop Janic explained that he obeyed the Pope, Vica answered that she would rather listen to the apparition than to her mother or the Pope. This is the practical result of an unapproved private voice placed above the Church's supreme visible authority. Diocesan study of the attacks. 41. Vica dismissed a hypothetical papal prohibition on the priest's ministry. Asked what followed if the apparition permitted confessions but the Pope forbade them, she answered that the Pope could say what he liked and she would maintain her account. This is a second, still more explicit subordination of papal authority to the alleged voice. Diocesan study of the attacks. 42. The figure threatened that Janic would not remain bishop and would face heavenly justice. A January 1982 entry says that he would not be bishop forever and that justice would be shown in the kingdom. The threat served the cause of friars resisting lawful decrees. Diocesan study of the attacks. 43. The figure accused the bishop of lacking God's love and grace. An April 1982 entry says that Janic lacked true love of God for the priests, did not act according to God's will, and did not act according to grace. This is spiritual intimidation directed at the competent judge of the apparition. Diocesan study of the attacks. 44. The figure said that the bishop's lawful position was harming the faith. A June 1982 message blamed Janic and his supporters for damaging faith by maintaining their stance. The purported revelation turned resistance to itself into resistance to religion. Diocesan study of the attacks. 45. The bishop was threatened with divine judgment for refusing the phenomenon. A later message demanded his urgent conversion to Medjugorje and warned that judgment would strike him if he continued to resist. Authentic discernment cannot proceed freely when the alleged revelation threatens its own judge. Janic. 46. The phenomenon entered an existing rebellion against a papally approved decree. Paul VI had specifically approved Romanus Pontificibus, which ordered the transfer of designated parishes. Franciscan provincial leadership answered that it could not comply, and the apparition later supplied heavenly arguments for the same resistance. Diocesan study of the attacks. 47. The claimants obstructed the authorized investigation by withholding primary records. Janich reports that Evan's diary, Vika's original writings, and the alleged life of Mary were withheld or offered under unusable conditions. Confidentiality from the public does not justify denying competent ecclesiastical investigators the evidence required for discernment. Janich. 48. 5 seers refused the Commission's confidential sign protocol. The Commission asked each claimant to describe the permanent sign and its date in duplicate sealed statements. 5 refused. The procedure would have preserved secrecy while creating a testable record, so public confidentiality does not explain the refusal. Diocesan study of the secrets and sign. 49. Vlasic required the seers not to give statements without clerical control. His own chronicle records that he warned them not to speak to anyone without the handler's knowledge. That arrangement gave interested promoters an opportunity to coordinate, filter, and correct testimony before outsiders heard it. Vlasic dossier. 50. The apparition praised and recommended the man controlling the testimony. The figure reportedly told the seers to thank Vlasic for guiding them well, and later recommended him as Ivan's spiritual guide. Those endorsements are especially damaging because Vlasic's own records show him channeling the narrative and controlling access to the claimants. Vlasic dossier. 51. The figure intervened to keep Father Slavko in Medjugorje after the bishop requested his transfer. The alleged message said that Slavko should remain, manage the details, and collect the record. This was a practical heavenly counterorder concerning parish personnel, issued for the benefit of the promoter who recorded it. Vlasic dossier. What the Church's investigations actually found. The Church's response is revealing. More than 4 decades of investigation have produced every verdict except the one promoters need. She has preserved room for genuine prayer and sacramental fruit, while repeatedly refusing to authenticate the rival authority that grew around them. 52. Bishop Pavel Janich reached a negative judgment after initially showing openness. The local ordinary interviewed the claimants, created commissions, examined diaries and tapes, and concluded that the phenomenon was not supernatural. His change of view followed the documentary conflicts rather than preceding the inquiry. Janich's own account. 53. Bishop Ratko Peric independently maintained the negative judgment. Janich's successor reviewed the inherited files and first-week tapes and concluded that no authentic Marian apparitions had been established. The adverse local judgment therefore survived a change of bishop. Peric's first-week study. 54. The Yugoslav bishops refused to affirm supernatural origin. The 1991 Zadar Declaration said that, on the investigations then completed, it could not be established that supernatural apparitions or revelations were occurring. Pastoral provision for pilgrims did not turn that judgment into authentication. Official Vatican Summary. 55. The Ruini Commission gave no affirmative vote to the later decades of apparitions. According to the Vatican's official summary, 12 members deferred judgment and 2 voted negatively on the later phenomenon. None voted affirmatively for its supernatural origin, even though the Commission was much more favorable toward the opening days. Official Vatican Press Conference. 56. The CDF forbade events that presumed the apparitions authentic. In 2013, the Apostolic Nuncio conveyed the CDF's direction that clergy and faithful were not to participate in meetings where Medjugorje's credibility was assumed, including scheduled appearances by Ivan. The Nunciature Letter. 57. The 2024 Nihil Obstat still did not authenticate the apparitions. Rome permitted devotion connected with the spiritual experience and recognized pastoral fruits, but expressly declined to declare that Mary appeared or that the messages came from her. More than 4 decades of investigation ended in pastoral permission without supernatural recognition. DDF. Official Vatican Explanation. 58. Rome requires its cautionary note to accompany collections of the messages. The DDF ordered the apostolic visitor to ensure that the 2024 note is included as an introduction in any publication collecting them. An alleged Marian corpus that must carry an official warning about confusion, error, and human interests has not earned ordinary confidence as heavenly speech. DDF 59. Future and previously unpublished messages require prior authorization. The apostolic visitor must approve their publication. This does not prove falsity by itself, but it shows that Rome does not trust the continuing message stream to circulate unreviewed. DDF 60. Rome tells pilgrims not to seek meetings with the alleged seers. The DDF directs pilgrims toward Christ, the sacraments, prayer, and the recognized pastoral goods of the place rather than toward encounters with the claimants. The alleged recipients of Mary's continuing visits are treated as unnecessary to the approved spiritual experience. DDF 61. The messages try to occupy the ordinary government of the parish. The DDF says that some give the impression that the apparition wishes to control pastoral details and displace the parish's lawful structures. The Mother of the Church does not need a locution-based shadow administration. DDF 62. The message cycle risks obscuring public revelation. The DDF warns that the incessant command to receive, live, spread, and await the messages can create dependence and excessive expectation, diminishing the centrality of the revealed word. Rome has officially acknowledged the danger of a parallel magisterium. DDF 63. Pope Francis publicly rejected the scheduled message model. He contrasted the Mother of Jesus with a telegraph or post office figure delivering dispatches at fixed hours, and expressed a low personal judgment of the later alleged appearances. This was not a dogmatic ruling, but it identified the central phenomenological problem at the highest level of the Church. Official Vatican Press Conference. 64. The later apparitions became increasingly planned and responsive to human arrangements. They occurred at fixed times, followed the claimants on travel, and were incorporated into public appearances. The Ruini Commission itself said that the later phase looked subject to outside influence and almost planned. Official Vatican Press Conference. Failed cures, a missing sign, and changing origins. Scripture supplies the oldest test of a prophetic claim. The word that does not come to pass was not spoken by the Lord. Deuteronomy 18:22. Count how many times this record needs that test waived. 65. A medical diagnosis of schizophrenia was overruled as demonic possession. A 1983 entry says that doctors diagnosed a patient with schizophrenia, but the figure declared possession and presented prayer as the only means of success, even allowing for the lower textual confidence of the translated promoter corpus, that is, reckless spiritual counsel without a documented examination or outcome. Promoter Message Archive. 66. Daniel Shakulya's promised healing did not occur as announced. Early claims attached a concrete cure to the apparition, but the promised result failed. A named failed healing cannot be rescued by pointing to unrelated pilgrims who later received spiritual benefits. Janic. 67. Marko Blažević died after a reported promise of surgical success. Archbishop Turk reported that Blažević told patients, doctors, and staff that the Gospa had promised through the seers that his operation would succeed. He never regained consciousness, after which the claim was recast as a request for prayer. Janic. 68. 56 promoter-selected healing dossiers failed the Lord's evidentiary threshold. René Laurentin submitted the files to the head of the Lord's Medical Bureau. According to Janic, they were found to have no practical value as serious evidence of miracle. Janic. 69. The permanent sign was repeatedly described as imminent but remains absent. Early records use language such as soon, very soon, and only a little patience. More than 4 decades of delay have converted a promised public confirmation into a perpetually deferred validation mechanism. Janic, Diocesan Study of the Secrets and Sign. 70. Promoters coordinated denials after the sealed paper deception was exposed. Janic reports that Father Slavko gathered the seers and obtained declarations denying that Ivan had disclosed the sign. The organized counter-record compounded rather than explained the original lie. Janic. 71. Mirjana continued promoting an ordinary watch malfunction as miraculous. A watch expert concluded that the damaged movement had an ordinary mechanical cause. Janic says that Mirjana continued presenting it as a miracle after she had been told the explanation. Janic. 72. Mirjana changed the sheep and smoking founding story under oath. She swore that she and Ivanka had gone to look for sheep, admitted the smoking story when corrected, and later returned to the sheep account. The purpose of the walk is minor. Swearing to a false version is not. Janic. 73. 3 seers denied knowledge that Vika's diary proved they possessed. Vika, Maria, and Yakov denied that the apparition had discussed Vego and Prusina, and claimed not to know the priests. The diary contained repeated earlier entries about those very men. Janic. 74. The seers disagreed about whether the infant Jesus was present. Vika, Ivanka, and Mirjana described a child in the figure's arms, while Ivan denied seeing one despite claiming to discern fine facial details. The presence of the infant is not a minor difference in angle or color. Parrott's first week study. 75. Queen of Peace was retrofitted into the opening week. The title is absent from the contemporary first week tapes, early diary material, and initial reports. Parrish found its first contemporary use in August 1981, while claims that it had been given in June appeared decades later. Parrish's first week study. The tapes and documents do not tell one story. Memory can be forgiven for wobbling. Ghost-written letters, borrowed diaries, backfilled chronicles, and altered photocopies are not memory. They are the work of hands. 76. Later founding cast accounts contradict Ivan's first week tape. Vika later placed Ivan with the chosen group on June 25th, and Mariana wrote of the six running toward the figure. On the June 27th tape, Ivan denied 3 times that he had been present on June 25th and said that he had been gathering tobacco leaves. Hauke, 77. Vika later supplied an apparition that Ivan had contemporaneously denied. Ivan's June 27th tape says that he remained in Chitluk and had no apparition that evening. Vika later gave a different story in which the figure appeared privately to him. Hauke, 78. Vika and Mirjana gave conflicting explanations for the end of Mirjana's daily visions. Mirjana's taped account says that the figure had been with her long enough, and that she had to face school and life without its support. Vika's account instead blames Mirjana's failure to do what the figure wanted, including complaints about clothing, makeup, and absences. Diocesan study of Mirjana, diocesan study of the visionaries. 79. The alleged figure made a recorded biblical mistake about Judas and Thomas. It reportedly called a skeptical doctor one of the unbelieving Judases. Father Jozo immediately pointed out that Thomas doubted while Judas betrayed, yet Ivanka insisted that the figure had said Judas. Hauke, 80. René Laurentin silently repaired the Judas error. Hauke reports that the leading promoter changed Judas to Thomas in his published narrative. Correcting a recorded heavenly mistake without disclosing the alteration is not faithful documentation. Hauke, 81. A Franciscan ghost wrote a letter for Vika to sign. Vlasic admitted before the commission that Vika had not written a May 1983 letter submitted during the diary dispute. Another Franciscan composed it and handed it to her for signature. Janic, 82. The first 2 Vika diaries were not written by Vika. Documentary analysis concluded that her sisters produced them, even though they circulated under her name. Scribal help might be innocent if disclosed, but falsely attributed documents cannot serve as contemporaneous first-person corroboration. Hauke, 83. The second diary was copied from a later Franciscan chronicle. Nicola Boulat's textual comparison found that the purported October to December 1981 diary derived from Vlasic's chronicle, which was itself composed later. A derivative text cannot independently authenticate the account from which it was copied. Diocesan documentary analysis. 84. Vika's acknowledged diary contains impossible calendar entries. Dates repeatedly fail to match the weekdays named in the text, including an entry treating Wednesday of Holy Week as Good Friday. The pattern points to retrospective reconstruction rather than daily notation. Diocesan documentary analysis. 85. The fourth diary both existed and did not exist. Vika said that she had kept a diary from the beginning and later denied it. Vlasic likewise shifted between acknowledging the source and denying possession, even though politically important extracts appeared nowhere in the disclosed diaries. Diocesan documentary analysis. 86. The parish chronicle appears to have been composed retroactively. It purports to begin in August 1981, but contains notices of later events, and its introduction is dated in 1982. A backfilled chronicle is vulnerable to tailoring and cannot function as independent contemporary corroboration. Diocesan documentary analysis. 87. The bishop received only a delayed and altered photocopy of the chronicle. After repeated requests, Vlasic supplied a photocopy rather than the original. Commission analysis found editorial changes, including softened language and threats directed at Janic. Diocesan documentary analysis. 88. Father Jozo supplied 4 dates for his pivotal heavenly locution. The command that supposedly converted him into the children's defender was placed on June 29th, June 30th, July 1st, and July 5th in different tellings. A dramatic event central to his role should not migrate across 4 dates. Hauke, 89. Yakov described answers being shaped by his own expectations. On an original first-week recording, he explained that he first thinks how the apparition will answer, and then she says it to him. That is first-person evidence of expectation entering the perceived message. Parrot's first-week study. 90. Father Jozo coached the children to make the apparition change venue. The early tapes record him repeatedly suggesting that Mirjana require the figure to appear in the church. She initially said that the children had never considered it, accepted the proposal, and the venue then changed. Parrot's first-week study. 91. The figure placed the duration of the apparitions under the children's wishes. On one day it reportedly answered that it would appear as long as they desired. The following day came the claim of only 3 more days. A sovereign heavenly visitation should not be governed by adolescent preference, or reverse itself overnight. Hauke. 92. The seers were allegedly dispensed from praying for themselves. A reported message told them that they did not need to pray for themselves because they had already been rewarded in a better way. No visionary privilege dispenses a Christian from persevering in prayer and vigilance. Parich. 93. Children were told to glorify Father Jozo alongside God. A 1981 entry says that Jozo should see the children glorifying God and him. Even if the verb is softened to ordinary praise, the juxtaposition is self-serving and unworthy of a message attributed to the Mother of God. Parich. 94. The bloody handkerchief tale was authenticated as sacred history. Vicka's diary recounts a bloodied man, a woman in black, and a handkerchief whose disposal would bring the end of the world, then identifies the figures as Christ and Mary. The grotesque folktale bears neither the proportion of Scripture nor the dignity of authentic Marian revelation. Janich. What the scientific claims do not prove, the instruments measured bodies. The promotional literature then advertised them as having measured heaven. 95. Vicka flinched during the hand test while supposedly in ecstasy. When a researcher thrust a hand toward her eyes, she reacted defensively. Her later explanation that she moved because the infant Jesus appeared to be falling is more extraordinary and less plausible than the visible physical stimulus. Medjugorje archive account of the test. 96. The celebrated EEG testing could not exclude subjective visions. Professor Théophile Camerer, then president of the Lourdes International Medical Committee, explained that EEG results can identify broad neurological states, but not intellectual activity, emotion, neurosis, or psychosis. Normal tracings therefore cannot establish an external heavenly object. Camerer's critical report. 97. The testing omitted the psychiatric inquiry needed to examine natural alternatives. Camerer called the absence of a psychiatrist and repeated biographical, family, psychological, and religious interviews a grave gap. Instrumental tests and brief profiles did not adequately investigate how the experiences arose. Camerer. 98. The alleged apparition controlled which tests could be performed. Camerer records that the claimant sometimes accepted procedures and sometimes said that the figure considered them unnecessary, after which the examiners yielded. An interested alleged source was permitted to restrict the inquiry into its own authenticity. Camerer. 99. The apparition-endorsed promoter Vlasic was removed under severe ecclesiastical restrictions. The Holy See reduced him to the lay state after doctrinal and disciplinary offenses, forbade his apostolate and religious teaching, and prohibited statements about Medjugorje under threat of excommunication. Later misconduct alone would not disprove an earlier apparition, but it makes the figure's praise and recommendation of his guidance powerful adverse evidence. Vlasic dossier. 100. The sun miracle has a documented natural and harmful mechanism. Medical literature records solar retinopathy, including lasting visual injury, after Medjugorje sun gazing. Dancing colors, dark discs, and after images are predictable effects of retinal exposure and do not establish that the sun moved. British Journal of Ophthalmology case series. Bonus. 15 red flags. We did not count. The 100 above were filtered for claims that could be stated discreetly, sourced reasonably well, and ranked without pretending that atmosphere is proof. That filter kept the headline honest, but it also pushed several of the most common and arresting criticisms off the board. The first group below consists of real context that does not by itself logically falsify an apparition. The second consists of documented conduct whose force depends partly upon the traditional Catholic sense of Marian dignity, ascetical fitness, and spiritual sobriety. The last group contains widely repeated wording whose primary provenance or translation remains disputed. Context is not proof, a judgment of fitness is not a laboratory result, and an unstable quotation should not be passed off as a transcript. None is therefore allowed to masquerade as one of the strongest 100. None should simply disappear either. The context offenders would rather treat as irrelevant. Bonus 1. The apparition became an economy, and the claimants stood inside it. Medjugorje grew from a village into a vast religious tourism destination with hotels, boarding houses, shops, tours, international events, and decades of recurring pilgrim traffic. Critics have long alleged that claimants and their families acquired property and lodging interests connected with that traffic. Publicly available evidence does not provide an audited account of each visionary's assets, and commerce around a shrine proves nothing by itself. But an ongoing apparition that produces the economy from which its accredited witnesses reportedly benefit creates a material conflict of interest no serious investigator would ignore. Associated Press on Medjugorje's economic interests. Michael Davies' Critical History. Bonus 2. The visionaries' lives do not resemble the hidden austerity Catholics associate with approved seers. None of the six entered religious life, despite early reports of religious aspirations, and their adult lives have remained unusually public and closely connected to the phenomenon. Marriage is holy, and God does not owe the Church 6 cloistered saints. That is why this is not proof. Yet beside Bernadette's obscurity, Lucia's enclosure, and the Marteau children's penance, decades of travel, public appearances, and reported commercial involvement form a contrast too striking to suppress. Diocesan study of the visionary's alleged vocations. Davies. Bonus 3. The Vlasic scandal was more sordid than the ranked list states. Reason 99 confines itself to the clean ecclesiastical record. Tomislav Vlasic was disciplined, reduced to the lay state, and later excommunicated after further defiance. Published accounts based on personal correspondence additionally report that he fathered a child with a religious sister before becoming the movement's leading priestly promoter and concealed the relationship. Those intimate details rest on reported letters and journalism rather than the canonical decree itself, so they were not counted separately. If the reporting is accurate, however, the alleged apparition's later praise of him as an exemplary spiritual guide becomes even more grotesque. Published account of the correspondence, Vlasic dossier, Vatican press conference. Bonus 4. The Gospa defended Ivica Vago, and the later story reportedly vindicated the bishop's distrust. The documentary core already establishes that the figure declared Vago innocent and fit for ministry despite lawful penalties. Bishop Janet's account, as collected in critical histories, adds that Vago later abandoned religious life and fathered a child with a former nun. Because the biographical sequel is less securely documented than Vica's diary and the canonical orders, it was not made a separate numbered reason. But a voice claiming heavenly knowledge chose the rebel over the bishop, and the subsequent record did not make that choice look wiser. Janich, Davies. Bonus 5. An angry mob abducted the bishop in the very ecclesiastical conflict in which the apparition had taken sides. In April 1995, Bishop Ratko Peric and his secretary were abducted and held in a car at a Franciscan monastery for 8 hours after Peric ordered diocesan priests to replace Franciscans in Mostar. Contemporary reporting confirms the kidnapping and its connection to the bitter jurisdictional dispute. It does not establish that a visionary ordered it or that every attacker acted from apparition belief, which is why the episode stayed outside the 100. Still, years of messages casting the rebellious faction as innocent and the bishop as the problem formed terrible spiritual soil for such a fruit. Contemporary RFE-RL report. A Marian apparition should look and sound Marian. Bonus 6. Priestly initiatives appear to have been backdated into commands from heaven. Hawke's reconstruction of the early record indicates that priests supplied rosaries and began parish recitation before the figure recommended them, and that Father Jozo introduced parish fasting while recording that the figure had said nothing about it. Later accounts made both practices signature commands of the Gospa. The rosary and fasting are excellent. Retroactively laundering human initiatives through the Mother of God is not. This was left outside the 100 because it combines several chronology arguments rather than presenting one clean falsification. Hauke. Bonus 7. Once a year somehow became once a year plus once a month. A promoter archive says that when Mirjana's daily apparitions ended, she was told the Gospa would appear to her once each year on March 18th. The same promotional record later published appearances on the second day of every month until 2020. Defenders may distinguish an annual formal apparition from monthly prayer encounters, but the archive itself repeatedly describes the monthly events as appearances of Our Lady. This internal instability was omitted because Mirjana's better documented rewriting of the March 18th story already appears in the ranked 100, Promoter Archive of Annual Apparitions, Promoter Account of the Monthly Appearances. Bonus 8. The heavenly audience reportedly included football predictions and laughter. Early critical accounts report Yakov asking whether Dynamo Zagreb would win the championship, with laughter breaking out during the supposed apparition. Davies also reports that a scheduled apparition was once postponed for a soccer match. Neither story proves fraud, and their force depends upon a judgment of supernatural dignity. That is precisely why they belong here rather than in the core. But the ordinary Catholic is entitled to ask whether the Queen of Heaven had truly inaugurated a decades-long public oracle to field football questions on command. Davies. Bonus 9. The figure allowed her veil to be stepped on, and her body and clothing to be handled. Bishop Parrott's analysis of the first week tapes records the children describing fingers bouncing away from the figure's body, a doctor touching her dress, and someone in the crowd stepping on the long veil. The events are documented as statements by the claimants, but their meaning is interpretive. Parrott judged the whole performance undignified, inauthentic, and scandalous. The contrast with the reserve and majesty of approved Marian apparitions is difficult to miss. Parrott's first week analysis. Bonus 10. 10 secrets for each visionary create a permanent suspense machine. Secrets are not foreign to approved private revelation, and secrecy alone proves nothing. At Medjugorje, however, multiple sets of 10 secrets, partial disclosures, a chosen priest, promised warnings, a deferred permanent sign, and decades of anticipation have kept attention fixed on what will be revealed next. Classical spiritual theology calls the appetite for hidden and future things curiositas, a disordered curiosity. Fatima's secret served a concrete summons to penance. Medjugorje's secret system has also functioned as an indefinitely renewable reason to keep watching the claimants. Diocesan study of the secrets. Promoter message archive. Bonus 11. The bread and water fast is presented with the reach of a private lawgiver. Fasting on bread and water can be excellent penance. The problem is the apparitions reported demand that everyone undertake it twice weekly, together with contradictory instructions about whether the sick are exempt. Traditional ascetical theology adjusts voluntary mortification to health, duty of state, obedience, and prudent direction. A private voice has no jurisdiction to impose one mechanical regimen upon the universal faithful. The contradiction concerning the sick is already reason 24. This broader objection to the system's ascetical fitness is necessarily more interpretive. Promoter message archive. Bonus 12. The sinless virgin reportedly recites, "Forgive us our trespasses." Medjugorje's own defenders acknowledge that the figure prayed the Our Father with the children. At Lourdes, by contrast, Bernadette reported that the Immaculate Virgin did not join prayers whose words presuppose the needs of sinners. A defender can answer that Mary may pray corporately for the Church, just as the sinless Christ taught the prayer. That answer keeps this from being a decisive doctrinal contradiction. The traditional objection remains sharp. Why would a genuine apparition blur a fitting distinction that an approved apparition preserved? Promoter history acknowledging the prayer. Bonus 13. The message reportedly softened the traditional alarm about damnation. A Medjugorje defense gives the answer attributed to the figure as, "The majority of souls go to purgatory, many others go to hell, only a small number go directly to heaven." That is not universalism, and it still says that many are damned. It nevertheless places the majority safely among the ultimately saved, sitting uneasily beside Christ's narrow gate, the Father's warnings, the traditional presumption of fewness, and Fatima's terrible urgency over souls falling into hell. Because its theological force depends upon that traditional baseline, it was not counted among the cleaner errors. It remains a remarkably soothing majority report from an apparition claiming an apocalyptic mission, Medjugorje defense reproducing the reported answer. Two famous quotations that require a warning label. Bonus 14. "I do not dispose of all graces," sounds like the Gospa denying her own mediation. Critics repeatedly quote the figure as saying, "I do not dispose of all graces," followed by counsel to address petitions directly to Jesus rather than through an intermediary. On its face, that language cuts against the traditional doctrine of Mary as mediatrix of all graces and sounds more Protestant than Marian. A Medjugorje defense says the underlying question was instead whether Mary is the source of all graces, and that the figure correctly answered that she is not. The original Croatian text, date, transmission, and translation have not been established here well enough to settle the dispute, so the accusation did not enter the hundred. Produce the authentic original, and its plain meaning deserves a severe theological examination. Until then, it is a serious reported allegation, not a certified transcript. Traditional critical dossier reproducing the accusation. Medjugorje defense giving the alternative wording. Bonus 15. The holiest Muslim woman story is explosive, common, and textually disputed. A widely circulated account says that the Gospa identified a Muslim woman named Pasha as the holiest person in the village. Some defenders acknowledge and reinterpret the story, while others say the accusation is false and that the figure merely praised Pasha's prayer. A line whose primary documentary source and exact wording remain unestablished could not enter the hundred. But if promoters eventually produce an authentic text carrying the common wording, no amount of retroactive nuance should hide its face value force. A supposed Marian oracle would be placing religious belonging, supernatural faith, baptism, and the sacramental order beneath an undisclosed private holiness. For now, the dispute itself belongs in the open, and the quotation belongs outside the evidentiary core. A secondary defense acknowledging the widespread account. A Medjugorje defense disputing it. The Gospa before the Gospel? Taken separately, these facts may look like defects in one sprawling apparition story. Taken together, they form something more serious, a system capable of protecting itself from correction. The voice authenticates the witnesses, and the witnesses authenticate the voice. Promoters control testimony and documents. Failed predictions are postponed or reinterpreted. Contradictions receive charitable repairs unavailable to ordinary witnesses. Lawful opposition becomes rebellion against heaven, while rebellion against lawful authority becomes fidelity to the Gospa. This is why the resemblance to a high-control religious system is not name-calling. The system does not need to abolish Catholic doctrine. It only needs Catholics to consult its messages, trust its interpreters, excuse its contradictions, fear resisting it, and place its practical authority above the ordinary means Christ gave his church. So ask the question this article will not answer for you. If a deceiving spirit wanted to work inside the church rather than against her, what would it build? Not a black mass, a shrine. It would fill the shrine with rosaries, confessions, and fasting, then weld all of that Catholic good to one brittle, unverified claim. It would train millions to wait each month for a new dispatch and call that waiting devotion. It would teach them that the bishop can err, but the voice cannot. And it would be patient, because a soul that has fused its faith to a private claim can lose both together when the claim breaks. Could this instead be nothing more than human enthusiasm defending itself? Certainly. The Church has not answered that question, and neither will this article. But Catholics cannot rule the darker possibility out merely because rosaries are prayed and confessions are heard. Those goods belong to Christ and His Church, not to the apparition claim wrapped around them, and an angel of light would know exactly which goods to borrow. The question is not whether Medjugorje sometimes sounds Catholic. In the Catholic order, the gospel judges the gospa, not the gospa the gospel. Ask where tens of thousands of messages have trained Catholic eyes to look. Then ask whether that order still stands. Before your next pilgrimage, answer these 5. You do not need to answer all 100 before boarding the plane. Start with 5. Medjugorje's promoters have had more than 40 years to produce coherent answers. So, there may be an explanation somewhere, is not an answer. First, what is the innocent explanation for Ivan's sealed paper? He wrote, signed, and dated a prediction of a shrine appearing in June. The prediction failed. He then said the sheet had been blank, but the sealed sheet proved that statement false. Which part of that record is compatible with a witness whose testimony the apparition itself guaranteed? Second, why did the figure announce an end that did not happen? The seer said on June 30th, 1981 that the appearances would last only 3 more days. They then announced on July 3rd that the appearances had ended. How did a phenomenon allegedly directed by heaven become a decades-long message stream after 2 closing announcements in its first weeks? Third, why did Maria retract a heavenly endorsement before the Blessed Sacrament? She had signed a statement tying Vlachic's proposed community to the Gospa's plan. She later said the claim was untrue, that she had never asked the apparition for that confirmation, and that Vlachic had led her toward the expected answer. Was the endorsement heavenly, human, or manufactured? Fourth, why did the figure make rebellion sound like obedience? It defended priests under lawful penalties, countermanded transfers, validated ministry despite restrictions, vilified the diocesan bishop, and threatened him with divine judgment for refusing the phenomenon. If an unapproved apparition may overrule the bishop and the pope, what remains of the Church's visible authority? Fifth, why does Rome's permission require so many fences? Rome did not authenticate the apparitions, warns of theological error and human desire in the messages, requires the warning to introduce message collections, subjects new messages to prior review, and directs pilgrims away from seeking the seers. If this is a heavenly message stream worthy of ordinary confidence, why does the document allowing devotion handle it like an unreliable witness? Those questions are not peripheral. They concern the central witness, the duration of the phenomenon, a manufactured endorsement, the authority of the Church, and Rome's final treatment of the message corpus. A theory that cannot answer them has no right to demand your assent. The 5 strongest defenses, but the conversions and confessions are real? Many of them undoubtedly are. Rome's recognition of spiritual fruits should be stated gratefully and without evasion. Souls have returned to confession, prayer, fasting, the Mass, and a more serious Catholic life through pilgrimages connected with Medjugorje. Yet the sacraments produce grace because Christ instituted them, not because every historical claim surrounding their celebration is true. God may convert a sinner in a prison, at a battlefield shrine, through a poorly written book, or after hearing a sermon from an unworthy priest. The grace proves God's goodness. It does not authenticate every human claim that occasioned it. This distinction is especially important here because Rome locates the approved pastoral good in prayer, sacramental life, and pilgrimage while deliberately declining to certify the seers and messages. If every good fruit at Medjugorje is explained by the sacraments the Church brought there, the apparitions are not needed to explain the good. Gratitude for grace is Catholic. Calling grace as a character witness for an impeached record is not. Rome approved Medjugorje. Rome approved public devotion connected with Medjugorje under the category of a nihil obstat. Literally, nothing stands in the way. Under the current discernment norms, that judgment recognizes signs of spiritual action and permits pastors to promote the good without declaring the alleged event supernatural. That last clause is decisive. The DDF says the faithful may give a prudent adhesion to the spiritual experience, but it also says they are not obliged to believe it. It does not declare the alleged apparition supernatural, does not certify the messages as Marian, and does not place the Church's authority behind every statement attributed to the Gospa. Nor did the decision erase the previous record. The Yugoslav bishops had declined to establish supernatural origin. Both local ordinaries reached negative conclusions, and the Ruini Commission gave no affirmative vote to the later decades. Permission is real, but permission is not proof. The visionaries were misunderstood or mistranslated. An awkward translation can explain an awkward sentence. A child's imprecision can explain a stray word. Any fair critic should allow for both. Neither explanation can repair a signed prediction that failed, a sealed sheet later described as blank, a retracted heavenly endorsement, a rumor repeated as revelation, incompatible sequences of secrets, a birthday story rewritten years later, or diaries copied and backfilled. These are not all grammatical problems, and they do not all depend upon one hostile translation. The DDF's own method confirms the distinction. It gives benign interpretations where an orthodox meaning can reasonably be supplied, yet still admits confusion, error, human wishes, and interests that are not wholly legitimate. It can be repaired does not mean the Blessed Virgin said it. The local bishops were biased. Perhaps a critic can identify imprudence, friction, or strong language in one bishop's handling of the case. That would not make Ivan's failed written prediction come true. It would not reconcile the seer's conflicting statements, rewrite the original tapes, or make Mirjana's oath accurate. The biased defense also has to explain why the adverse judgment survived Bishop Jonic. His successor, Bishop Parich, studied the inherited files and the early recordings and remained negative. The national bishops declined supernatural affirmation, and Rome itself ultimately permitted devotion without authenticating the apparitions. Bias is relevant when weighing a disputed interpretation. It is not a solvent that dissolves documents. Science proved that the ecstasies were genuine. Science can measure pulse, reflexes, electrical activity, attention, and other bodily states. It cannot put the Blessed Virgin on an EEG. A normal tracing may exclude some pathologies, but it cannot identify the external object of an interior experience. Professor Kammerer's criticism goes further. The examinations lacked the repeated psychiatric, biographical, family, and religious inquiry needed to test natural alternatives, and the claimants sometimes limited procedures by reporting that the apparition did not consider them necessary. The tests, therefore, did not exhaust the ordinary explanations that defenders claim they excluded. At most, the testing supports the conclusion that something subjectively unusual occurred during some episodes. That is a long way from proving who, if anyone, stood before the claimants. Withholding belief is not impiety. Medjugorje presents Catholics with a false moral pressure. Believe, and you are said to be open to grace and devoted to Mary. Doubt, and you are suspected of resisting conversion, attacking good fruits, or closing your heart to heaven. The record reverses that pressure. Every contradiction excused is excused in Our Lady's name. Every failed prediction defended is defended as her speech. Every threat against a lawful bishop, every doctored document, every human rumor elevated into revelation, and every theological repair is placed beneath the title of the Immaculate Mother of God. A Catholic may pray the Rosary, fast, confess his sins, adore the Blessed Sacrament, love Our Lady, and remain entirely unconvinced by Medjugorje. He may even visit the place, receive the sacraments there, thank God for every genuine conversion, and still refuse assent to the apparition claims. Rome expressly leaves him free to do so. Nor must he solve the entire mystery. Its causes may be human, mixed, or spiritually darker. Perhaps some claimants were initially sincere, and perhaps later promoters shaped a story they had come to believe. None of those possibilities turns broken evidence into credible testimony. And whatever the cause, a Catholic may not treat Catholic language as proof of Catholic origin, or let an unverified voice make disobedience look holy and doubt look like sin. Catholics need not declare with absolute certainty what happened at Medjugorje. They need only refuse to place the Mother of God's name beneath contradictions, failed predictions, manipulated documents, and words unworthy of her. Permission to visit is not an obligation to believe. Medjugorje has not earned that belief. Sources. The most important claims above rest on official church documents, diocesan investigative records, contemporary recordings, signed writings, and the DDF's own 2024 note. A few message claims survive chiefly in promoter compilations. Those entries are identified in the text and should carry less weight than the documentary core. Readers should examine the linked sources rather than trusting summaries from either side.